Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to GNR Central, and I want to talk about something that Duff did after he left Guns N' Roses and got sober, and that's how he became a finance guy. And it's kind of funny, the story of how everything came together. He was newly sober, and he went to his basement one day, and he noticed he had these boxes full of financial statements from when he was in Guns N' Roses, or at that time I think he might have still been in Guns N' Roses. It was kind of towards the tail end of him leaving the band. And he went through the financial statements, and somebody who had no business experience, like he did at the time, didn't really understand the financial statements. And exactly, he just looked for the line that just showed everything, like how much money they made and how much he was owed. But he said it was quite difficult to understand these statements. And that kind of started his journey into actually going back to school and taking courses in finance. Now, you'd think that Duff would just go to some people that he knew in the industry, maybe some managers, and kind of get some guidance on how to read these financial statements. But as he told BBC back in 2011, he didn't really trust anybody in the industry. And the only real way for him to learn all this stuff was to go back to school, as he told here.
Soccer bond was. I was too embarrassed to ask anybody else really. I didn't trust a lot of people in my industry. And I didn't have anybody to really go to, so I went to school. I went and got into this class at a community college in which it covered financial statements. And so I could take the information I got at class one night and come straight home. And I would be in class like, oh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And eventually in that first class, I brought a financial statement. I blacked out the numbers and I brought it to my professor. And I said, I'm just having a problem with these. He goes, well, they are sort of misleading. These aren't like classic financial statements. They're a little misleading. We weren't blatantly ripped off, but there was commissions and things taken off places that I would never allow to happen now. But as I matriculated through school, I got very interested in academia, got into a school eventually that I wanted to, Seattle U. But I even before, I didn't graduate high school. So getting into Seattle U, I had to jump through a bunch of academic hoops, like community college, junior college, taking math, taking things to get myself to the level to get in there.
Now, one of the other things that Duff did to get into Seattle U, he had to write an essay basically about his life. And he had to write an essay, which was kind of like at least one of the parts of the admission process. And he didn't really know what to write about. But then he talked to one of his friends who happened to play in another Seattle band called Presidents of the United States of America, who were pretty popular back in the mid-90s. And he kind of encouraged Duff to just talk about his life and his journey up to that point in his life, which was around the mid-90s to like 97 or so. And here's what he had to say about that.
Money in my 20s. Now, I made a good amount of money. I don't know how much. I don't know who has taken from me, how much they have, if they have, which they did. But it was time for me to sort of arrest this portion of my life and gain some knowledge. So I got myself eventually through going through community colleges and courses, and I wanted to go to Seattle U, to Albert School of Business. I thought I could go in and write a check and just go to school, and I got a GED, and I couldn't just go in and write a check. They let me know. So I had to go through community college at Seattle Central and get A's in these classes and write admittance essay, and one of the guys from Presidents of the United States of America, the band, he went to Brown, and he was an English major. I'm like, what do I do? How do I write? I forget how to write a fucking essay. So I wrote, he goes, and what do I say? He goes, tell him everything. Tell him your pancreas blew up. Tell him how much you drank, how much cocaine you snorted. Tell him everything. And tell him you have a wife now, and you have a little baby, and you know that you want to go to this school. And so I did that. I wrote this letter, and I got in. And just the accounting classes at the beginning alone were so valuable to me. I could read my financial statements that we were getting, and for the band, and my own personal financial statements. And there was questions that arose from me being able to finally read these things, and some nervous people on Ventura Boulevard. And I ended up moving accounting firms. And
Now, McKagan himself admitted in an interview with Fortune magazine that it took me twice as long as an 18 or 19-year-old just out of high school to do the homework, but I got through it. And by the time he was accepted into Seattle University's Albert School of Business, McKagan had become actively involved in managing his own portfolio, which included everything from stocks and mutual funds to property. So a few months into his last year of business school, McKagan, who had left Guns N' Roses in 1997, formed a new supergroup called Revolver, and the band also included, of course, his former bandmate Slash, as well as Matt Sorum and frontman Scott Weiland. And McKagan had to drop out of school, basically, or he took a hiatus from business school to go on tour, and at that point, he was still one semester short of graduating. So when Revolver broke up a few years later, he started touring with his own outfit, and it was around that time that Duff started to have words spreading around that he knew something about managing money. So he began getting regular calls from musician friends with questions about everything from where to buy a house to where they should invest their money. And it was though McKagan had spoken publicly about the business of music and he had authored a column in Playboy on finance, which is called Duffonomics, he is quick to downplay his investing expertise. He said, "I'm not a financial planner. I was just trying to figure this out for myself," he says. "I didn't want to be 60 years old and broke, having made all this money in my 20s. That was my simple goal." And it was from there he started his own wealth management firm to help out musicians. And around 2011, 2012, he met a guy named Andy Bottomley, who was a former banker. It was around the time or the early birth of his company called Meridian Rock that they started to interview money managers in both Europe and the US. And it just happened to be the fact that he was in London the same night that Guns N' Roses were playing in 2010, and that's when he ran into Axl. So Duff was supposedly in London to interview people to bring on board for his wealth management company that he just ended up getting a hotel room next to Axl. Now, there's already scores of wealth managers, both at small boutique firms and large-scale, banks, who cater to high net worth individuals like musicians. Now, what made Duff much different is that he understands the industry a lot better than some of these other wealth managers. For example, he says most bankers overestimate the window in which musical acts are guaranteed income, which he places at 3 to 5 years. Now, the musicians themselves are equally clueless, he adds. You think the money is just going to keep coming in, he says. And when you get that big contract or your record goes platinum, you're selling out concerts, you don't see that it's going to end. Anyone who's ever been, behind the music or cribs knows that rock stars aren't generally frugal creatures, but they're rarely told in blunt terms when they need to cut back on expenses, which is one of the reasons why so many of them go into debt or end up broke. He said a lot of business managers and attorneys are nurturing that, saying you're the greatest, this is never going to end, the next album is going to be even greater. And he said a manager's responsibility is not to tell you in a couple of years you're done. That's the best way to lose a client. Now, musicians tend to surround themselves with intermediaries who make their financial decisions for them. And McKagan says Meridian Rock's advisors will talk directly to the talent in plain and simple terms. The company's 3 tenets, he notes, are righteousness, not screwing people over, transparency, and education. Now, he did admit in the interview that not all rock stars will be interested in the service, and he believes that many will want to learn more about finance, though, but are afraid to admit how little they understand. What's funny is that, there was all this news in 2011 and 2012, all this buzz about Meridian Rock, but really since that time, I haven't really heard anything about the company, and Duff really hasn't talked openly about it either. So it's not really clear whether he's still doing his wealth management company or whether things didn't work out for him, or maybe it's something that's on the down low now that he's back with Guns N' Roses. But I remember after that initial release, it was like there's this big company, Meridian Rock, that he's starting. It's going to be helping all these musicians. I couldn't even find a website for these guys, but maybe that's something you guys can let me know. Maybe you guys have come across them, or maybe you know something more that I don't. Now, Duff's financial courses he took and the business school he went to turned out to be pretty useful too when they formed the band Revolver. He said, at that point, I knew what I was talking about to a certain extent, and never assume you're the smartest guy in the room, but I think they were assuming I was the smartest guy in the room, which is just fine. We did our record deal, we did our deal with agents, with a manager, with merch companies, and I was at every turn. We learned a lot from the Guns N' Roses experience. Managers commissioning off the gross, you live and you learn. And it was, in fact, Duff who's the one who really negotiated the recording deal that Revolver would end up getting and signing with RCA back around 2003 and 2004. But that does it for today's video, guys. Let me know your thoughts. I remember taking a 4th-year financial management course when I was in school about 10 or 12 years ago. And I found that, going through financial statements, I did pretty well in the course and I enjoyed it a lot. Had I not chosen the career I did, maybe I would have went into business school or something. But I found it was pretty enjoyable. And let me know if you guys have taken similar courses and what your experience was. So let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, guys. Hit the like button, be sure to subscribe, and go check me out at gnrcentral.com if you guys want to stay up to date on the latest Guns N' Roses news. Have a good one, guys.